There is a long-running myth in the fat acceptance community that weight is as fixed and unchangeable as ethnicity, and that intentional weight loss is racist. Lies such as these, combined with a crab bucket mentality, may be actively contributing to the deaths of women of colour, and here is why. It is very important to note that there is a lot of depth and nuance when it comes to discussions around race or ethnicity, and as a white person, I can fully acknowledge that I'm not and never will be an expert on this topic. Anything I put forward is therefore completely open to discussion and or criticism from people of colour, and any assertions are based on given evidence rather than my own personal lived experience. Another important thing to keep in mind is that race is, in many ways, socially constructed. To explain this further, we'll look at these twin girls. Lucy and Maria may appear to be completely unrelated due to their different features, and they'll be considered to be of different races. They have the same amount of genetic variation as any other siblings, but due to the beliefs around race, they may be treated extremely differently. For example, if they theoretically both became pregnant and went to the same maternity ward, Maria would be more likely to suffer from complications during childbirth due to a misconception that women of colour do not feel pain in the same way as white women. Genetically speaking, she would likely have a very similar pain tolerance to her white sister, but due to her appearance, there are broad assumptions about how her body works. It must also be clarified that labels such as black and white can be misleading, as they can lead to an ignorance of ethnicity in minority populations. It's not uncommon to see a white person distinguish themselves from others by saying they are Eastern European, 10th generation Irish, or 2% South African, but they may not appreciate that the same level of variation exists in people of colour. Many adults are still of the belief that Africa is a homogeneous country rather than a very large and diverse continent, and may assume that non-white people are all somehow connected to each other but nothing to do with white people. They may see no differences between an Indigenous Australian and a person from Congo because they both have dark skin, even though an Indigenous Australian may be as far removed from African heritage as a white American. I'm adding this information into the video as fat acceptance will frequently use a very simplified model of race and ethnicity when discussing genetics or culture, which is overly reductive and demonstrably wrong. Due to the nature of Western society, there may not be intentional or inherent racism in referring to a race in a broader manner, as perceived race can and will impact a person's life experience. However, when it comes to discussing culture and genetics, there needs to be way more recognition of these intricacies. The Health at Every Size branch of fat acceptance is known for its fudging of data and facts, and a relevant example of this is their claim that black women are all supposed to be fat. They will use various random women from history as examples, with very little context or information being given about their lives. For example, they like to show pictures of Sarah Bartman, a black woman who was displayed in freak show exhibits due to her unusual bodily proportions. Sarah is now suspected to have had lipedema, a medical condition that affects one's proportions due to abnormal fat depositing. It is not realistic to use a woman from the 1800s who had an unknown medical condition to make broad statements about all black women, especially since black people are not a monolith. If one were to tour the entire African continent, they would see a huge amount of genetic variation in the people. If it is believable that I, somebody with Portuguese genetics, could look very different to somebody who's from Sweden, then it must be accepted that two individuals from different countries in Africa may share very few, if any, phenotypic traits outside of skin colour. Throughout history, white colonists have viewed black people as indistinct from each other, only seeing their skin colour and then assuming that they are all one and the same. This is one of many attitudes that allowed slave owners to dehumanize them, viewing them all as lower life forms or commodities rather than distinctive individuals with unique and rich cultural histories. It is not very progressive to apply the same logic to black women now, by pushing the idea that there is only one possible body type for all of them, whereas white women can be varied. When it comes to their attacks on thin people, they most frequently go after white women, using the term skinny white girl as if it's a slur. They think they are being empowering by portraying all black women as warrior goddesses whose bodies are built to be strong and robust, as opposed to skinny white bitches who are all sickly agents of the patriarchy who live to please shallow men. There is an element of virtue signaling here, in which they may elevate one group above another in terms of perceived morality to make themselves look better. After all, how bad can they be if they claim to be anti-racist? It is not anti-racist to turn entire groups into stereotypes that can be used to punch up on other people or speak for them. Fat activists may speak about black women as if they're all pure and innocent victims of diet culture with no personal agency, and that without the uplifting voices of fat middle class white women, they can never be freed from these chains. They also view black women as a commodity, using them to sanitize or prop up their own movement to make it look more progressive than it is, but only when it suits them. They will throw around references to vague groups of fat, black, LGBT women who allegedly started the body positivity movement, but none of them are ever given names or histories. For a movement that claims to be feminist, they don't seem to be doing much to preserve women's history. In reality, the only verified founder of fat acceptance was a white man named Bill Fabry. He was the founder of NAFA, an organization that was focused on making society accept fat women and their chubby chaser husbands. All of whom were white, by the way. This was an organization that has been linked to homophobic conspiracy, as was discussed in my previous video. It would make sense for a progressive movement to want to distance itself from seedy history like this, but it is not fair or correct to use idealized caricatures of imaginary black women to do this. Fat activist discussions of racism do not do anything to help those who are actually affected by it, and they only seem to care about prejudice when they can make it all about themselves. Racism is only ever discussed in the context of fat phobia, and they will draw false equivalences between the two. It may be true that a fat black woman may be on the receiving end of more prejudice than a thinner or more conventionally attractive black woman. Unfortunately, that is because most societies still have deeply entrenched misogyny, and women who are not conventionally attractive are treated worse. This may be amplified due to racist misconceptions, one of which being that black women are less feminine than white women. What we must remember is that fat phobia and racism are in no way comparable. A fat person of colour may lose weight, but they will never become white, and therefore they will be at risk of racism for their entire lives. Being fat is something that is caused by calorie consumption, even in cases of diseases that are linked to obesity. Being a person of colour is something inherent and unchangeable and is visible to everyone that you meet. The worst consequences of fat phobia also fail to match up to the least serious consequences of racism. By trying to compare the two, they are trivializing racism. By co-opting the struggles of minority groups, they may end up making said minority look guilty by association, even if they never agreed to be affiliated with this movement in the first place. Aside from psychic damage, fat acceptance can and does kill. It is understood that ethnic background can elevate the risk of certain diseases such as diabetes, so an individual may be at a very elevated risk if they are also obese. It is downright evil to coerce marginalized people into worsening a health risk by saying that they are internally racist if they don't, or that they're letting down their ancestors. Body positivity attracts a mostly white audience, and I personally don't feel right about a majority white group telling ethnic minorities that they are racist if they disagree with them. Examples of weight-related racism are also extremely contradictory. If one isn't fat, then they're enabling and engaging with colonial white beauty standards, yet they refuse to talk about the fact that obesity is far less common in Asia than it is in the West. Why is it alright to say that all Asian people are fat-phobic for not accommodating morbidly obese Westerners, but wanting to live past 50 is intolerant of black people? Why is obesity allowed to be culturally significant, but fitness or thinness isn't? By their own logic, one is racist if they condemn thinness, since it may be associated with people from East Asia who have been the target of increased racism since the pandemic of 2020, and victims of racism for long before that. Their accounts of fat phobia seem to be either generic stories about being considered unattractive, or clothes being too small, or doctors not enabling weight-based delusions. Just on the topic of medical discrimination, it is laughable and insulting to compare racism to fat phobia. As I alluded to earlier, people of colour and especially black women face enormous amounts of racism in medical settings, often leading to worse health outcomes. Medical professionals also face significant racism from patients and colleagues, with a 2022 British Medical Association survey revealing that 9% of healthcare professionals left their job due to racism, with a further 23% considering quitting and 16% more taking sick leave to avoid racism. As for patients, the statistics are even worse. A 2022 BMJ survey showed that between 65 and 75% of Black British people experience racism whilst accessing healthcare. Some of the worst statistics come from maternity wards, with Asian and mixed race women being twice as likely to die during or after childbirth, with Black women being 4 times more likely to die. Infant mortality was additionally significantly higher in ethnic minorities. Experiences like this have no place in the modern world, and it is frankly insulting to compare this to a doctor telling you to lose weight in order to try and control obesity related disease. Medical discrimination is a problem that has affected people of colour for hundreds of years, that has left lasting scars on entire communities, meaning that medicine related phobias are actually more common in minority ethnic communities. It would be stupid and reductive to insist that nobody has ever been wrongfully judged due to their size, but sadly, prejudice is to be expected from most human beings. That doesn't mean it's fine or excused, and all professionals should be trained to be empathetic to the people they are meant to be helping. However, it is not prejudice to explain that weight does have an impact on health outcomes, and it would be illogical and stupid to suggest expensive testing for rare disorders before suggesting or considering weight loss. Science is about gathering evidence and eliminating the most plausible explanations first, rather than enabling the feelings of a layman by gambling with increasingly unlikely theories, further delaying treatment. Fat activism is damaging to people of colour since it makes sweeping statements about their bodies and cultures, ignoring all nuance and reinforcing stereotypes under the guise of acceptance. It worsens pre-existing fear and distrust surrounding medicine by forcing a narrative that all doctors are out to get you if you are fat, which is dangerous to those whose ethnicity predisposes them to obesity-related diseases at lower BMIs. It reinforces separation and turns personal choices into politically or racially motivated issues, treating minority groups as nothing more than useful victims for furthering a movement. It speaks over them and undermines their real lived experiences as people of colour, with tone-deaf comparisons being drawn between racism and fat phobia. Fat acceptance is not your friend if you're a person of colour, LGBT, disabled, poor, or a woman. It is using you, and if you let it take you too far, it might just kill you. Thank you for watching. I'm going to try do more of these. You seem to like the last one, even though the views are kind of on the floor. I'm hoping if I make more, it's going to pick up a little bit. But I'm more committed now. I hope you enjoy the high quality videos, and let me know what you want to see in the next. Goodbye.